Hello again, Sorcs. Here I am with another info/news video about Diablo 4. After the 18th of July patch 110A, the game was left in a severely and unreasonably badly balanced state. All classes received massive nerfs, mostly in the shape of reduced bonuses of the stats and affixes we get, such as cooldown reduction, vulnerable damage, crit strike damage, force kill damage, as well as various types of damage reduction, just to name a few of the major culprits. There were a plethora of other nerfs that affected all classes, as well as some buffs that do so too. But the overall result was that many of the working viable meta builds received a big blow, and the ones that were non-meta and barely viable even stopped being viable for endgame content. The aftermath was that a plethora of players, me including, did not feel the game was worth our time in its current state and were left looking for other games to play in the meantime. Blizzard held a campfire chat livestream yesterday and made a bunch of promises to address the situation and fix the mess in the upcoming patch 1.1.1. The ETA for this patch is around 1 to 2 weeks from the campfire chat on the 21st of July, so 1 to 2 weeks from the 21st of July. What promises did they make? How do they plan to fix this mess? This article and this video, you can read the article that accompanies the video if you feel like it, will hopefully answer any questions you may have regarding this. So link to the article I would post in the description, and I would also post it as a comment. So buckle up, Sorcs Club, and let's go. First things first, here is a quote from that live chat from the very beginning. We know it's bad, we know it is not fun. Yes, I completely agree. And it's good that they know. Blizzard acknowledged that reducing player power this drastically was uncalled for, but then why do it in the first place? They have at least realized that they made a big oopsie and are fast with the damage control, so we already received yesterday a hotfix that adjusts the HP and damage of the middle and higher tier Nightmare Dungeons monsters. They also promise that they don't plan on doing a patch like this ever again. This was a quote. So without further ado, below, or in this case on your screen, you would be seeing a list of the Nightmare Dungeon changes that the most recent hotfix included. They're saying we're implementing a reduction to overall monster power levels in Nightmare Dungeons. The new top range for tier 100 will feel like what tier 70 was previously. Although these values make it appear that the higher tiers are easier than lower tiers, this is not the case because the monsters also benefit from being significantly higher level than players in higher Nightmare Dungeon tiers. For example, in tier 35, the HP is reduced by 2%, the damage is reduced by 14%. On tier 50, the HP is reduced by 20%, the damage is reduced by 13%. On tier 70, the HP is reduced by 60%, the damage is reduced by approximately 54%. On tier 100, the HP is reduced by approximately 82% and the damage is reduced by approximately 79%. There's also a bunch of bug fixes that you should be seeing on your screen. I'm not gonna read through those, and we can move on to the next segment. So here's the question, why did they do those nerfs? They tried to explain it, I'll try to explain it as well. Blizzard explains that the reason for those nerfs is that they did not want to see certain stats performing as much as they did compared to others, and that they wanted people to use a wide variety of affixes instead of always using the same 5-6 affixes in their gear, like cooldown reduction, damage reduction, vulnerable damage, crit strike damage, core skill damage, for example. This seems like a sound reason, but the way they went on about it is, I would say it was far from the right way to handle this. First off, if they wanted to not feel, for people to not feel pressure to use damage reduction in 3 out of 4 of their leg or slash pants armor affixes, for example, they should have just buffed damage reduction to the point where people would feel that 3 of those on the same item are an overkill and just 2 would suffice. But they didn't do that. They did the exact opposite and nerfed various kinds of damage reduction affixes. And now comes the damage control hotfix I mentioned and listed the patch notes for earlier, where Nightmare Dungeons are getting nerfed to match the weaker player power. How it's better than nothing, it's definitely not the proper way those things should be done. I'll be logging in later tonight to see how the game feels with the new Nightmare Dungeon rebalance, for the sake of testing. Another change I strongly disagree with is the cooldown reduction nerfs. They went overboard with that one, and this severe of a nerf was totally uncalled for. They could have just went for a very minor 5 to 10% nerf, and then just increase the cooldown of certain skills that were being abused if they wanted to prevent infinite resources, infinite casting of certain abilities and durations and so on, and that infinite uptime, if that was their intention. Now let's talk about the vulnerable problem, as I like to call it. I, among many players, agree that we need a rework or a removal plus replacement of the vulnerable damage mechanic. Simply nerfing vulnerable damage affixes or ropes is not going to magically solve the problem. There is a reason why we the players take this stat in all of our builds and why we take advantage of the vulnerable mechanic, and apparently Joe Pipora knows that it's because of how vulnerable damage is calculated. So the devs admitted that it was not the proper way to handle this problem and that they'll need to do a proper rework of the vulnerable damage formula. He also said that doing a proper rework of the vulnerable damage will mean needing to look at other things, such as, for example, overpowered damage or even crit strike damage as an example, because all kinds of builds use those, all kinds of builds use it currently. By it I mean vulnerable damage. So good alternatives will be needed. Next up, the developers said something that they're calling the Diablo IV mission statement. Blizzard showed a list of 4 key points, for lack of better description, that they will use as guidelines when making patches and balance changes to avoid such a big mess of a patch from happening ever again. They are as follows. Point number 1. A wide variety of viable builds to discover, put together and optimize across all 5 classes. 2. New items and powers every season to keep the game fresh and increase build variety. 3. Continually evolving endgame content with high monster density for powerful builds to mow down and activities to challenge your build. And number 4, make the game more fun for players. So those 4 mission statements or mission statement points are obviously something that makes sense. So far since launch, I have never felt that Blizzard was spot on with either of them while playing Diablo 4 on various builds across every class. They definitely have a long way to go before I would feel like each of those things feels accomplished. I obviously cannot speak about point 3, as only the future will tell if the endgame evolves in the right pace, but I do believe they should have launched with 2 more endgame activities as an alternative to Nightmare Dungeons that are just as rewarding and give us more ways to level up our glyphs and spend our in-game grind time. Regarding new items and powers, patch 1.1.0 was a hit and a miss. Sorcerers once again getting the short end of the stick with yet another unique that has an awful negative effect and is still the only class to get negative effects alongside the positives with their unique and legendary powers. 1.1.0 did bring some cool stuff for various classes in terms of uniques and legendaries, but was kind of a 50-50 for me, what I considered cool and reasonable. And that also applies to the malignant hearts that also seem to be 50-50 hit or miss, and also has some underwhelming ones for the sorcerer. Next up was a promise to make sorcerers viable and to make barbarians worth it again. Blizzard made a promise that with the 1.1.1 Sorcs, who were always at the bottom of the barrel in terms of how underpowered they were compared to other classes, a viable class worth playing. They also made a promise to bring Barbs to a reasonable power level again, as 1.1.0 hit the very few reasonable Barb builds pretty hard too. Will this happen? Time will tell, but I for sure hope it's not an empty promise, as I love playing elemental mages / casters in games, or a good close range brawler class, which the barbarian never felt like one to me, even with a strong build ever since the game launched. Players can expect that to happen, partially through revisiting of the legendary and unique powers for those 2 classes and reworking plus rebalancing those to make the 2 classes have a reasonable amount of viable builds for players to use. Another thing to talk about is changes to crowd control in Nightmare Dungeons. Blizzard also made a promise to address the ridiculously stupid amount of crowd control that exists in Nightmare Dungeons, as well as the lack of many builds capable of dealing with it. I hope this change comes with patch 1.1.01 because right now it's extremely painful to place certain maps and map affixes on the majority of the builds, especially ones that don't have enough, or any for that matter, unstoppable to counter the freezing, rooting, slowing, etc. enemies. The next point to talk about is the new endgame mode to challenge our builds. Wait for it, in Season 3. Apparently, Nightmare Dungeons are not the best type of content to use as a goal/benchmark to challenge one's builds, and Blizzard will be introducing a new endgame mode for us to do that. But it's going to be a long wait of at least another half a year before we get a taste of it, as it's coming with Season 3. Not sure if they were talking about this content, but they did also say they plan on bringing back the bosses from the campaign story in a new endgame type that suits them when asked about bringing those bosses back. Another thing that they were asked about was leaderboards, and they did say that their plan is with Season 3 to bring leaderboards and content where those could fit. Here's a wild guess from me. Could we be getting a tower slash arena slash crucible slash survival mode type of endgame with X arena stages where every end stages there's a bigger boss fight? Is this going to have a timer running to see who gets to the end of it quickest? Is this going to be the content that reuses the story bosses? I say probably, but my guess is as good as anyone's at this point, so we'll just have to wait and see. The next promise they made is to leave overpowered builds as they are until they can provide reasonable alternatives. Blizzard also promised to keep some builds overpowered until they have provided the player base with a compelling viable alternative to those builds. What is worth noting is that such meta shift changes will occur at predictable times, like the start of a new season for example. However, in cases where a bug is causing game-breaking damage or crashes, Blizzard will still react quickly. Another talking point is the increased density for Helltides and Nightmare dungeons. Another change that we'll supposedly be getting with 1.1.1 is an increase of the mob density in the majority of Helltide areas as well as in Nightmare dungeons. They'll also look into improving performance for certain effects and skills so that the substantial increase to mob density doesn't result in substantially worse performance. Do you need more storage? Well, the devs' answer is one extra stash tab is their best offer. A big source of the negative experience in Diablo 4 is the inventory and storage tension. And maybe only players who play a single class with a single build are the only ones that don't feel this, but anyone who has played more than a single character or likes testing multiple builds on at least one character has realized how bad and how little the storage we've got available is. Blizzard has previously promised that Season 2 will come with a rework to the gem system and that gems will get their own materials stub in the way veiled crystals and the likes do. However, players need improvements to inventory and storage space right now. The best Blizzard can do is apparently give us a measly extra stash tab, which is obviously better than zero extra stash tabs. So what can they do to hopefully solve this problem for the long run, in the long run? I and many others, I assume, believe that giving us personal stash tabs plus much more shared ones would be the better option. I would say 4 to 5 personal stash tabs plus 10 shared ones should be all we need to have enough room for all sorts of builds on every single class and the equipment for those builds to be stored. Additionally, I believe we'll need a big change to the aspects and the Codex of Power system, where every single aspect is on the Codex of Power and can be unlocked from dungeons and other types of content for that Codex. As an added bonus, some people in my chat have talked about an idea where being able to put the extracted aspects in the codex with their better than minimum raw values and making them selectable from there when imprinting would be an amazing quality of life feature. And something that Tinfoil had theory is that they don't want to give us as much storage because they plan on monetizing stash tabs later. Hopefully that's not the case because that would ruin a lot of the things in game in terms of monetization. Another thing they talked about is the respec cost. The respec cost will be confirmed 40% cheaper with patch 1.1.1. So one more area where the game has needed improvement was definitely the respec cost for skill points and paragon points. They promised that 40% reduction to the cost, which would make it roughly around 7 to 8 million gold for a full respec at level 100, which is down from the 12 to 13 million cost for this. While it's still far from perfect, it's a step in the right direction. I still believe respect should not cost much at all, and the real cost of switching to a new build should be left to just farming the new gear and aspects for it, plus re-rolling the stats on that new gear to suit the build. Currently, having to pay 12 to 13 million on top of the already costly re-roll, which is enchantment, extract, and imprint costs that one would need to do when gearing up for a new build is a kick in the nuts. Reducing it by 40% down to 7 to 8 million will make the kick feel more like a punch in the nuts, so it will still be pretty painful. I've counted that excluding skill and paragon respects, switching a build could end up somewhere between 20 and 40 million gold coins on average. The main reason why the cost is that high is because of the shitty design of the enchantment slash rerolling system, where each consecutive enchantment gets more and more expensive. If they change it so that the cost of our second reroll is as high as the cost goes, then this whole respec in brackets problem will be much bearable. We need a gold sink, but it also needs to be a reasonable one with the bloody fucking costs. And to top things off, there were promised changes to experience coming. Blizzard are also promising more changes to experience, in particular speeding up the leveling from levels 50 to 100. They did not provide specifics, but they did say they don't want level 100 to feel like a job, but they still want it to feel like a challenge. They added that they don't want players to reach a wall around 70 or 75 in terms of levels, where it becomes a total slog. I'm personally looking forward to that, as experience rates are a sore subject for me in water games like Diablo 4.
To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for water and not so water games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer wanna be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end. Struck up, keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.